have a loving relationship with my parents. We speak on a regular basis. I visit them on a regular basis. They've even come to my not so kosher or not kosher enough household several times. Of course, they brought their own food. They brought their own tablecloths. They brought their own water. But, they did come and we did have a meal together.
Did you find that offensive?
Yes, deeply. I mean, the food, okay, fine. But the tablecloth?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Often parents interpret their children exiting the community as a personal rejection. Why don't you love me? If you really love me, you wouldn't do this. This has to do with how I want to live my life. This is not about loving you or hating you. And they say, well, if you really, really love me, you wouldn't do this to me.
Hi everyone. Today for my long-form interview series, we're going to discuss a topic that's very near to my heart, the experience of those who leave the Hasidic community. I will be talking to Zalman Newfield, a professor, researcher, and fellow exiter. Zalman is the author of the book Degrees of Separation, Identity Formation While Leaving Ultra-Orthodox Judaism. For the book, he interviewed people raised in Hasidic communities who decided as young adults to leave. Through this large pool of testimonies, we gain so much insight into the untold stories of leaving, relationships with the communities and the past, stories beyond the few pop culture narratives we often hear. Zalman himself left the Hasidic community. He was born and raised in the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidic community. Zalman attended Lubavitch schools which exclusively taught religious subjects such as Torah, Talmud, and Hasidic thought. In his early 20s, he rebelled against the rules of his community and pursued his passion for secular knowledge, first earning a bachelor's in psychology from Brooklyn College and eventually a PhD in sociology from New York University. Zalman is now a professor of sociology at Hunter College. He's also a host on the New Books Network podcast. Meanwhile, Zalman and his wife Jenny are the proud parents of two young daughters who they raise as non-Orthodox but still deeply committed Jews. Zalman, thank you so much for being here. I've been really looking forward to our conversation, so welcome. Your book was a terrific read. I highlighted so much of it. It was really interesting to hear stories about people who have left that are different from what I usually hear in the media. So I'm hoping you can start us off by telling us what your book is about, what you were researching, just a summary of what you did in your book.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Frida. I'm really glad to be here today and so glad to have this opportunity to talk about my research. And as you mentioned, I think that my book adds some insight that is kind of lacking from the general kind of popular cultural representations of ex-Orthodox Jews that tend to present a kind of narrow focus and a sort of flat representation to the people who leave. So to begin with, when I was in grad school and started to work on my project, I started to read the academic literature on the topic, which is what aspiring scholars do, and I found that much of the literature on religious exit, both about specifically Jewish religious exit, but also more generally people who leave kind of strict religious communities, the literature tended to assume a kind of binary about religious self-identification. In other words, it tended to assume that either people were a part of the community or that they had left and they had put, their experience of being in the community in the rearview mirror, that this was behind them, this is no longer kind of a part of their life. And as I read this literature, I realized that that was certainly not the experience that I had leaving the Lubavitch community. And I also began to speak to some friends and acquaintances in the Hasidic community who had gone through a similar process, and they also seemed to not fit the kind of narrative or typology that the literature assumed. So I did my own study. I ended up interviewing 74 men and women who left various Hasidic sects, and I found that indeed, for the vast majority of people that I spoke to, they tended to keep some aspect of their identity, often a great deal of their identity, of their upbringing. They tended to keep it with them even after going through a major life transition. In other words, they were consciously trying to jettison many parts of who they were, of how they represented themselves, even how they thought about themselves. For Hasidic men, where maintaining one's beard is a very big deal, they often shave their beard. For women who were told that they weren't allowed to wear jeans or pants, they began to wear these clothes. They often stopped keeping kosher. They often challenged the authority of the rabbis in their community, or even the authority of the Bible to dictate how they should live their lives. And yet, even though they had gone through so many, in so many ways, they had changed who they were and how they conducted their daily life, there were still aspects of their upbringing that stayed with them, that they retained, which is why I ended up giving the title for my book, Degrees of Separation, to kind of highlight this, that even though these were, I was describing people who had separated from their Hasidic upbringing, but they were not completely disconnected from their upbringing. There were degrees of separation. There was an extent to which they were separated, and there were at the same time in significant extents to which they were still connected in various ways. Some ways that were sort of positive, affirming, things that they appreciated, but more disturbingly, and at the same time I think more interestingly from an academic perspective, some of what they retained were things that they were either unaware of that they were retaining, or they were aware of and consciously try to get around them, try to get rid of them, sever those linkages, and yet they had a very hard time doing so. So I talk a lot about in my book the idea of habits rather than actions, rather than things that people did or things that people thought. I talk about habits of action and habits of thought. So these are ways of thinking and ways of acting that stayed with them, even if, or even after they try to get away from them, they try to discard them. But it turns out that people's upbringing, especially in a kind of strict religious community where there's a tremendous emphasis on conformity, there's all sorts of messages that people absorbed from a very young age, and that those messages, those practices often stayed with people for years after leaving their community.
You know, what I find really interesting is that even though I would count myself among those who have a connection in all the ways that you mentioned, be it subconscious habit, conscious habit, positive connections, and some of them are residual and not necessarily positive. I have also heard what is, I think, the popular conception that those who leave the Hasidic community sever all ties. Not only that it is a two-way street, both the community will sever all ties, and the person who leaves will say, I am done with this. This was so crazy. I want nothing to do with it. And your book paints a completely different picture.
Right. I mean, I think it's interesting I emphasize in my book the idea of narratives, that when we hear, stories, whether it's from members of the community, people who leave the community, or members who stay in the community, instead of just asking whether this is true or false, are they lying? Are they trying to fabricate something? That we should think of these as narratives that could be analyzed on their own merits, and especially I think it's worth thinking about why various groups of people might promote a particular narrative, whether or not the picture that's being painted by that narrative is strictly speaking, accurate. But it's interesting to think about why a particular group of people might want to promote a narrative. And in line with what you were saying, if we think about it for a minute, it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of the community that is being left, right? It makes a lot of sense that they want to highlight, hey, these people who left, they're completely disconnected. They're gone, and that this creates, or at least sort of presents a kind of neat separation between the insiders and the outsiders, and that could be very helpful for a community that's trying to police its boundaries, the boundaries between the community and the broader outside world. And these boundaries are very important. If we think about the history of the Hasidic community in America, many of the members of the Hasidic communities in America came to America after World War II, that they really represent a very different immigration story from what we think of as the typical Eastern European Jews who arrived in America in the late 18 or early 1900s. Those people were to a large extent, trying to become Americanized. They were eager to become American. They were often made fun of as being greenhorns, people that don't really know the language, people that don't know what a baseball is, people that don't know who Babe Ruth is or whatever. And there was this very strong cultural pressure on the new immigrant arrivals to try to blend in and absorb as much of American culture as possible. They were coming to America because they understood that it was the golden Medina, the golden land, this land of great opportunity and great possibility for poor immigrants from Russia, Poland, and so on. The Hasidic community in America is largely people who came to America after World War II. These are survivors of the Holocaust. These are people who resisted coming to America. They were not trying to become assimilated. They were not trying to become acculturated. They ended up here because of sort of pressures of global history. And as a result, when they came to America and they established communities in places like Williamsburg, the Satmar community, and Crown Heights for the Lubavitch community, and other neighborhoods for other Hasidic communities, they were really trying to create an environment that was pure and holy from their perspective and was separate from the outside world. And now they have a problem. You fast forward 40, 50 years, and you have people who are the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of immigrants to America after World War II, and the community has put so much time and effort in trying to create this kind of holy, separate environment, separate from the outside secular Goyish world. And now these grandchildren or great-grandchildren are leaving the Hasidic community and joining the very environment that the Hasidic community was trying so hard to try to keep at arm's length. So it's understandable from the perspective of the Hasidic community that they try to promote this narrative, hey, if you leave, then you're totally disconnected. That way, they could have this kind of neat us versus them framework, But if you have people that are somewhere in between, that leave but are somehow still connected, that still love their family, that may still feel connected to the spiritual leaders of the community or to the Torah or to Jewish practice or whatever, they become a problem for the community. How are we supposed to deal with these people? So it's understandable from the perspective of the Hasidic community that they try to claim that once people leave, they're completely disconnected. At the same time, if we look on the other side of the equation, from the perspective of the people who are leaving, clearly, leaving a strict religious community is a very painful and possibly traumatic experience. So it's understandable that people who are on their way out, who have gone through so much already, that motivated them to leave, and also they've gone through so much in their process of leaving, possibly many levels of rejection and alienation from loved ones, from friends, from family, So it's understandable that those exiters themselves will try to portray the process in this kind of neat, clear-cut way, in the sense that they say, oh yes, everything that we were a part of, we're totally disconnected from that, we're a new person, and that's fine, that's understandable why they would want to portray that, but it doesn't necessarily answer the question of how do they actually feel when they're at home by themselves, or when they're talking to other exiters, and what are the things that they're actually bonding over, and what are the things that they're actually nostalgic about, or things that they still, feel deeply connected to in some way.
Did people tell you, oh, I don't have anything to do with my family, and then during the course of the interview, did you start to unfold that the story is more complicated than their self-narrative?
Yes, definitely. Often people said from the beginning, I'm still very connected to my family, which, to be honest, when I started my research, I was kind of surprised because, again, from the narrative of the community itself and the narrative that some exiters, including sort of prominent exiters who have, had a presence in social media or what have you, they've promoted this narrative that we're completely disconnected. One exiter who ended up writing a memoir, Deborah Feldman, she wrote at the end of her first memoir that her old self is dead, that this is completely dead. She's essentially, I'm paraphrasing, a new woman, a new person, and I thought, wow, okay, that's very interesting. Is that really the way that things work out? And not surprisingly, years later, when she, I think they had maybe a second issuing of her first memoir, she actually sort of revised her perspective and said that, she spoke to this point. And she said, I was very angry then. This was a very painful period in my life, and so I spoke in anger and it may be a little too hasty, and that actually I'm still connected in some ways or something like that, so that's just her case. But I think it does speak to a larger point. And yes, when I spoke to some people, sometimes they started off telling me that we're still very connected, and then other times they said, "Oh yeah, I don't really have anything to do with my family." And then once we got talking, they said, "Well, yeah, but every Rosh Hashanah I make sure to call them and we talk for a bit, or on Purim I go to visit my family on the Jewish holiday of Purim." So okay, maybe they didn't have extensive contact with their family, but there was still some form of communication, some line of communication, and that was clearly important to them and to their family, which is why both sides continued to stay connected, even though there were, it was painful, and even though there were many sort of complications and barriers that they needed to overcome in order to maintain that kind of connection. So yes, that happened. Also, sometimes people told me, I have nothing to do with my Hasidic upbringing. This is, totally behind me. And then after speaking for an hour or two, they said, well, sometimes I do make shunned, the traditional meat stew for Saturday. Sometimes I make that, but it doesn't mean anything. It's nothing. It's not important, Well, okay, they may not eat it on the Sabbath, and they may not cook it for the reasons that their Hasidic parents or mothers cook it or whatever, but it seems like it does mean something to them, that it is important to them in some way to have this kind of culinary connection with their family and with their upbringing. So I think that there's many examples of this, but definitely in some cases, the people I spoke to weren't themselves aware at first that they were engaging in certain practices that came from their Hasidic community. And that only after kind of reflecting on it with me, they seemed to realize that these things were happening and that on some level these things were important to them.
And were they okay with that being important to them? Because I have found there are people for whom it is necessary to have a self-narrative of complete severance, to say, I am over it, I've moved on, I have a new life, I'm not in this in-between place. When people realize, oh, I actually do have residue of that past, did it disturb them, or were they okay with it?
Right. So I think that there's a spectrum, I think that some people were very aware of these what I call role residuals, the residual aspects of the role that they previously occupied as a member of the Hasidic community. And sometimes, again, they were aware of it and happy about it. I remember one young man told me he loved singing Hasidic songs, even though he shaved his beard, he's having girlfriends and sex out before marriage or whatever, and not sort of following some of the really important kind of strictures of the Hasidic community. He said he loves sitting Thursday night listening to Hasidic melodies and singing along, and that his neshama, his soul, feels revived through this practice. So that was one side, one kind of extreme. And then there were some people that were kind of unaware of some of the things that they were engaging in, but once they became aware of it, they said, well, it's understandable. I did this for a long time. It's not surprising that some of this would stay with me. Okay, fine. And then there were some people that clearly were disturbed by this. I remember one fellow I spoke to told me that he realized at some point that he was still following the kind of ritual practice for the order of cutting his fingernails. That there's a particular practice that Orthodox Jews follow based on teachings in the Talmud that maintain that this is good for people's health and warding off demons or whatever it is, and that you're supposed to do things in a certain way. You start from the left hand, you skip every other finger. If you don't do this, you put yourself in danger. And he realized one day that he was still doing this, and he's very upset about it. And he said at one point he tried to not do it. And so he did, but then he realized he felt very anxious, like the demons might come and get him, So even though he doesn't believe in demons, but still, this was such an ingrained part of how he was raised that, he just couldn't kind of fight it. And another woman, a woman I spoke to told me that one day she went to a non-kosher restaurant, and she was already eating non-kosher food for a long time, but she had never eaten pork. And she ordered a split pea soup one day, and when the soup arrived, she noticed that there were little floaty things inside the soup. And she told me, I don't know, I have no idea why, but for some reason, when I saw the little floating things in the bowl of soup, I thought, wow, maybe they're pig, maybe it's chazer, maybe it's treif. And she said, I have no idea why. I started to eat it. I thought, this is crazy. Why would they put pork inside a bowl of soup, And then after a few minutes, she just felt overwhelmed. And she ran over to the waitress and asked her what was in the soup. And the waitress confirmed, oh, yeah, actually, it is pork. It's ham or something. And she told me that she quickly ran to the bathroom and made herself vomit in order to expel the ham from her body. And she told me that this was crazy. She's like, I have no idea why I did this. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in the Torah. I don't feel compelled by the dietary rules in the Torah. I don't think there's anything morally wrong about eating ham. And yet, the thought of me eating ham is just so disgusting to me that I physically force myself to vomit in order to expel it. So I think that's sort of the other extreme, where people may not necessarily want to engage in particular practices or hold on to some of their upbringing, and yet they can't seem to get away from it.
Yeah. Well, I think there are those. There are habits, I think, that are not necessarily adding anything to your life. They're part of ingrained behavior. They're not enriching. Maybe they bring back, they make you feel powerless. Let's say if you're still cutting your nail in a way that makes no sense to you, I can see how that could create internal conflict and cause distress. Because on the one hand, you're like, this makes no sense, but you can't make yourself do it any other way because, you have that your body remembers that this is dangerous kind of thing, which I think anyone from any place in the world can relate to. But then there is the part where a lot of people, I don't know if a lot of people will say it, but I hear it all the time, that when people leave, they disconnect with the relationships. And I'm not talking about habits per se. Now I'm talking about relationships. They disconnect with the relationships entirely. And this I hear from outsiders all the time. Oh, when you leave, you get shunned. Your family doesn't talk to you. I will tell you, as someone who works with a Hasidic community, there is one personal question that I can count on getting every single time someone finds out where I come from, and that is, do you talk to your family? And it seems to have the built-in assumption that probably not, in most cases, not. And, what I wonder is to which degree that is a narrative pushed by the outside. I'll explain to you what I mean. I've worked as a consultant on a production. We try to be very vague so I don't get into any trouble. But in that production, there was a story about a woman who leaves. And the creators said when she leaves, her family sits shiva. They mourn her as if she's dead, and they don't even they don't want to be in the same space, as her. And I said, I don't actually know anyone who sat shiva. And they said, for the purposes of this story, we need this to happen. It's like, don't bring your accuracy. You weren't hired to ruin our narrative. And I don't know. I guess maybe I'm thinking when people leave, we are encouraged to say, "Oh, my family, they cut off with me. I'm alone. I'm an island in the world."
Yeah. So I think that's a really, really interesting point, and I could attest both to when my book came out, I did a bunch of book talks, and people always ask that question. Do you still speak to your family? And the answer is yes, I do. I have a very loving relationship with all of my siblings. I have a big family. I have a loving relationship with my parents. We speak on a regular basis. I visit them on a regular basis. They've even come to my not so kosher or not kosher enough household several times. Of course, they brought their own food, they brought their own tablecloths, they brought their own water, but they did come and we did have a meal together. Did you find that offensive? Yes, deeply. I mean, the food, okay, fine, but the tablecloth,
yeah.
I mean, come on, their own paper cups. I mean, I had paper cups. No, they're not good enough. They need their paper cups. So yeah, of course it's offensive, it's hurtful in a way, but at the same time, for me, I view that as, so to speak, the cost of doing business. That yes, they're compromising in some way by coming to my kitchen. By the way, we have a kosher kitchen. It's just not as kosher as they would like or whatever.
You have a kosher kitchen?
Yeah, I mean, we it's again, it doesn't follow exactly the way that Orthodox Judaism does things, but we don't have pork or shellfish or things like that. I have a separate set of dishes for milk and meat. So
can I ask if that's for your personal or religious reasons?
It's not for me. No, it's sort of for my wife, I would say, and that's my own compromise or negotiation with my wife, what she's comfortable with. So yeah, me by myself, I would. I would do things somewhat differently, but it's fine. I'm okay with it. It doesn't. I don't find it deeply traumatizing to have 2 sets of dishes or whatever. It's fine. But it's not, like I said, kosher enough for my Lubavitch parents and family, so they want to bring their own food. But yes, they bring the tablecloth, they bring their own, paper cups or whatever. But I feel like if that's what they need to do to feel comfortable in my space and to allow us to be, to be able to have a meal together and be a family together, from my perspective, again, obviously other, exiters might have very different view. From my perspective, that's a price well worth paying. So that's about my family. But I was going to say about the sort of commercialization of exiter narratives. Clearly, if we think about the memoir and then the wildly successful Netflix miniseries based on it on Orthodox, things like that, there's obviously a market for some narratives, some memoirs, some books about the exiter experience, as well as miniseries, TV shows, whatever. And I had my own experience. I was also contacted. I was contacted by a showrunner, someone who was trying to put together a kind of documentary series along the same lines as the show on Orthodox. And he wanted to know, first of all, if I would be interested in being in the documentary, and also kind of getting my thoughts about, the documentary series itself. And we came up with this issue, came up in terms of, essentially the showrunner kept on talking about these critical moments, and he said, well, what were the critical moments in your life? And it became very clear that he was thinking of it like a movie, that there needs to be these dramatic moments in order for the story to carry itself, and essentially I argued both from my own personal experience and from the experience of interviewing 74 people that people's lives are way, way too complicated to fit these kind of simple narrative structures. That, yes, there could be dramatic moments, but there's a great deal that leads up to them, and then there could be kind of circling back and, waffling back and forth as people become comfortable with their new identity. And like, it's not this kind of simple straight line that you could, map onto a 3 hour or 6 hour whatever show and say, okay, here is how it works, and so I think that's a very good question in terms of whether publishers who are looking to publish memoirs or filmmakers who are looking to produce films, do they kind of impose on the ex-Hasidic narratives these kind of dramatic moments or things that they think would seem very dramatic to the viewers or the readers, regardless of whether or not this is actually accurate. So yes, I think that can be one influence, one factor that may play a role in the sort of popular perception of this process and this idea of being totally disconnected from your family after you leave. I think related to that, there's been a bunch of attention to ex-Amish people. And in the Amish community, there's this idea of shunning, that once a person leaves, then they're shunned by their family. So they have a period during the Rumspringa, there's a kind of period of religious self-exploration, but then the individual has to decide whether they want to, return to the Amish community and commit to being, a good Amish person for the rest of their life, or they stay out in, the sort of secular modern world. And if they decide to stay in the modern secular world, then they're shunned by their family. And I wonder if, again, some of the sort of popular perception of the experience of ex-Orthodox or ex-Hasidic Jews may be influenced by people's understanding of how things work in the Amish community. And they hear about this idea of shunning, and they kind of assume that there must be a parallel in the Hasidic community. And one of the sort of empirical insights of my book is that this is really not the case. And I worked very hard to try to find people who would tell me that their family sat shiva for them. And again, based on the popular perception, I thought this would be very easy to find. And it turned out it was very difficult for me to find. I found many people who told me, yeah, I think Hasidic people get shunned. And then when I said, well, did you get shunned? No, not me. No, I'm still talking to my family. Well, do you know someone? Well, I can't think of their name, but it definitely happens. It definitely happens. So even within the ex-Hasidic community, I think there was a sense that this kind of thing happens, but it was very difficult to actually find people who would report that this, that they personally experienced this. And in the end, I found 2 people who sort of qualified, who told me, yes, their family sat shiva for them. And
what does a family sitting shiva look like? Did they know?
They didn't really know. They heard that their family sat shiva. It was very kind of vague. But the point is that even in that case, those 2 cases, and again, not to diminish the trauma in any way for those people to hear, even if it didn't happen, to hear that their family sat shiva, meaning, shiva is the ritual sort of ceremony for grieving the loss of a loved one, as if someone passed, for someone who passed away. So to sit shiva for someone who was alive and well in Brooklyn, is obviously a very, very would be a very painful thing. So I don't want to diminish their experience in any way, but I do think it helps to contextualize it. So I would say that in both cases there were sort of extraneous or extra factors that played a role. In one case, one woman, she had married a non-Jewish man. So it wasn't just that she had left the Hasidic community or was no longer Orthodox, but she had also, married a non-Jewish person. So that was one factor. And then a man who told me that his family sat shiva for him, in his case, he told me that he was involved in agitation to try to bring awareness of sexual abuse within the Hasidic community. And he had been involved in this before he left the community. And that he felt, this was his own perception, he felt that the spiritual leader of his community had told his parents to sit shiva for him when he left the community as a way of punishing him for his activism on behalf of victims of sexual abuse in the Hasidic community. So again, I can't say exactly what happened, and why, but that was his own perception of why, this kind of extra severe step was taken in his case to sit shiva for him when he left the Hasidic community. But it was certainly the case, again, for the 72 other people that I interviewed, that they did not experience this, and that this is certainly not the common a common occurrence. Even though, again, even among ex-Hasidic people themselves, there's a sense that this kind of thing happens, but to other people.
But to other people, I wonder if it was something that happened in the past, in the shtetl, before the war, if that was practiced, and that's why we believe it's still practiced, and it sort of is such a horrible thing for a family to go through. I can just imagine that if your child leaves, the process of mourning them, I can see why families would say, whatever this tradition is, we're not continuing it. I don't know. Is it a myth from Fiddler on the Roof that this was ever practiced, or is there evidence that it was practiced in the past?
Right. So that's a very good question, and definitely if people are familiar with Tevye, the black and white film based on the stories of Tevye the Milchiker, Tevye the dairyman, from the Yiddish writer Shalom Aleichem, the film that was made in, I think it was 1929 or something, or the early 1920s or 1930s. In that film, but not in the later, much more famous, production of Fiddler on the Roof, which is based on the same material. You don't see this in the later film, but in the earlier film, the father does kind of completely disconnect from his daughter, who goes off and also again marries a non-Jewish man. So yes, there's certainly sort of cultural resonance from that. I think it is a good question. It's a historical question. I'm not a historian. It's a historical question about what happened in Eastern Europe before the Holocaust, and how were people who sort of deviated religiously, how were they treated? My sense is that there were all kinds of ways that people were treated, that this is a very complex thing, and that depending, not dissimilar to what we find today, depending on what the relationship between the child and the parents was before the person left, depending on the mental health of the family, depending on the particular religious strictures of the local community that they're leaving, all sorts of factors could come into play and could shape the response of the community to having a child leave. But I don't think that there was one uniform way that children who left the community were treated before the Holocaust in Eastern Europe.
I mean, in general, if you're going to sit shiva for your child, you're probably writing off the possibility of the child coming back, which I am sure that the families that have a child going OTD would continuously hold out hope. I mean, that's what I find, that people are waiting for the child to return. And this leads me, I want to pivot to the question of the types of relationships people have once they leave, because holding out hope that the child will return, I think, reflects a conditional acceptance. Well, we want you in our lives. We really want a connection, but please be like we want you to be. We're waiting for the moment you'll be like we want you to be. There's no, I mean, the question of what I hear a lot is a lack of acceptance of the path, even while accepting the child. So something that I found really interesting in your book is you trace the evolution of relationships. It seems that people speak to a difficulty earlier on, and maybe things kind of get better with time. And actually in your podcast, in your segments in the podcast Heretic in the House, it seems you didn't get to this hunky-dory place where your family comes to your kitchen either right away.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely think in my own case, and I would say for really the vast majority of the people that I interviewed, there was definitely a process. And the process, again, people, ironically or not, some people have accused me of, in my book, of kind of sugarcoating this process. And I don't really understand how people could come to that determination, since I'm pretty explicit in the book that this is a very painful process. But I definitely want to emphasize that this is a very, very painful process and can be, profoundly traumatizing for the people who are leaving, as well as for the families, of the people who are leaving. And so, so yes, this is a very painful process, but it does seem that in most cases, at least the cases of the people I spoke to, and I should emphasize that it's not just that I interviewed 74 people, it's that the people I interviewed, while I don't claim that they're what we might call a kind of scientific sample, a perfect representation of the population of people who leave Hasidic communities. I've never seen a study done with that kind of sample. It's basically impossible to do. You'd have to have thousands and thousands of people, potential participants, and it's just not really feasible. But still, I went out of my way to try to have as much diversity within my sample as possible. So my sample primarily is based on people from the Lubavitch and Satmar Hasidic communities. These are two of the largest and most prominent Hasidic communities throughout the world. And I included roughly equal number of men and women. There are also people who identified as gay and people who identified as other kind of sexual orientations. There's some variation in age. There's some variation in geography. Many of the people come from the New York area, but some came from other places in America. A few people came from other countries. So there's even there were a few older members in the sample. So I tried as much as possible to have a fair amount of diversity. Some people came from very affluent families. Some people came from more working class backgrounds. Some people were especially in the Lubavitch context, some people were the children of Baal Tshuvas, people who had joined the community from the outside, whereas others were kind of from sort of blue blood families whose Hasidic ancestry goes back to Europe before the Holocaust. Some, in the Satmar case, some came from very prominent Satmar families, some came from sort of more regular families. So there's a fair bit of diversity within my sample. Anyway, what were we talking about?
Yeah, we were talking about, wait. Hold on.
Oh, staying in touch. Staying in touch.
The process, the evolution.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I like that. So, yes, so thank you for that. Yes, so it definitely seems like there is a process that people do go through stages. And I think part of the real trauma in this experience is that for the people going through it, it's not necessarily clear that they're going to get out on the other side. In my case, my mother basically kicked me out of the house when I shaved my beard. That's not an uncommon experience for Hasidic men. Once they shave their beard, which is a very public kind of declaration that they're, rebelling against at least some of the rules and norms of the Hasidic community, it's not uncommon for parents to turn around and say, okay, well, if that's the way you're gonna do things, you can't be here anymore. Sometimes they justify it by saying, well, you'll be a bad influence on the younger children. Sometimes they'll say you'll hurt the shidduchim, the matchmaking, prospects for other siblings or whatever. But however it's justified, this kind of thing definitely happens. And for women, again, if they put on pants or they start dating people outside of the community, it's certainly not uncommon. Or if they marry someone who's not Orthodox or not Jewish or whatever, it's not uncommon. Or they come out and they say that they're gay or something. It's not uncommon for their parents to turn around and say, okay, that's it. You can't come home anymore.
Is that an anger reaction? Do you think that in general?
I think there's a lot going on. Again, it's very common for exiters to understandably focus on their own pain, which could be very profound, and their own trauma that they experienced within the Hasidic community, which could be very profound. At the same time, for Hasidic parents, for Hasidic families, there's a lot that they're going through as well. Again, I'm not trying to justify any kind of harsh response on the part of parents, but there is a lot going on for them, and to have a child that you work so hard to raise in a particular religious community and in a particular religious way, and for them to turn around and seemingly rebel against all the things that you taught them and all the things that you consider sacred and important in life, it could be just very hurtful. Often parents interpret their children exiting the community as a personal rejection. Why don't you love me? If you really love me, you wouldn't do this. And the children might say, this has nothing to do with you. This has to do with how I want to live my life. This is not about loving you or hating you. And they say, well, if you really, really love me, you wouldn't do this to me. You would know how painful this is, and you wouldn't do this to me. So it's definitely understood in a very personal way, even if that's not the intention on the part of the child. And also there's real humiliation. I mean, in the Hasidic community, the Hasidic community is operates very much on the idea of conformity, that people should look the same, they should wear the same Hasidic garb. There's a tremendous emphasis put on, the clothing that the men wear, the clothing that the women wear, the shaitels, the wigs that the women wear, the stockings that they wear, all kinds of things that are prescripted by the community. For someone to kind of step out of line and say, hey, I'm going to do things differently, this really goes against the ethos of the community and could be seen as being very shameful. It's embarrassing to have a family member, to have a loved one act in such a way that is seen not only as wrong, but as immodest, as maybe a sign of mental illness. I mean, in a community where so much of religious life and daily life is prescribed, you're told not just how to dress, but what to think, who to vote for, where to go to synagogue, how to pray in synagogue, how many children to have. I mean, all kinds of things, even very personal, very intimate parts of people's lives are being sort of scripted by the Hasidic community. For someone to get up and say, hey, I'm going to do things differently, there's a strong sense that this person must suffer from mental illness. Otherwise, why would they do that? Why would they want to go against what's obviously in their best interest and go against what's obviously such a beautiful way to live?
Yeah.
And of course, there's also a lot of stigma attached to mental illness in the Hasidic community as well as elsewhere. But so I think that these kinds of factors play a big role in terms of how harshly parents and family may initially respond to an exit or leaving the community. But then, as I was saying, I found that over a period of time, sometimes a matter of months, sometimes a matter of years, parents and children and siblings tend to kind of find some modus vivendi, some way of staying in touch. And again, there's a spectrum. For some people, it just means, a call once a year or a call a few times a year before a holiday. And the call is kind of stilted and awkward, but everyone feels like it's the right thing to do. For some people, it means a visit several times a year, but still kind of awkward and painful. And for many other people, it means a really loving relationship or a continuation of the loving relationship that they had before, but at the same time, again, there are issues, there are complications. And one of the things that I talk about is a kind of, I call it a conspiracy of silence, that even though, yes, the exiter is coming to visit their family, let's say, and spending time together, there's a kind of unwritten rule or set of rules in terms of what kinds of things the exiter could talk about when they're in the presence of their family and how they have to dress. Again, there's a lot of emphasis on dress, on the dress code. So even if, let's say for the Hasidic man, maybe he shaved his beard, so, that's that. But he has to make sure to wear a yarmulke, to wear a skull cap when he comes home. Or maybe he even has to put on a Hasidic hat or something in order to draw less attention to himself. And then again, in terms of the kinds of things that people could talk about, the exiter could talk about when he or she comes home, again, like you said, it's a kind of, you could view it as a kind of conditional love. So yes, we want to stay connected. We want to still have you in in the family. We want you to come visit us, but don't tell us about what you're doing, please. Please, whatever you do, fine, but leave it at the door. And again, that could certainly be very painful for exiters. They say, well, this is really important. I mean, for one thing, let's say, and again, it's by no means the case that all exiters are part of the LGBTQ community, but certainly there are, a significant portion. And, for someone in that, like that, being, let's say, gay or trans or whatever, could be a really profound part of their identity and something that they're very proud of and something that's, just a big part of who they are. And then to be told, okay, you could come back home to visit, but don't mention anything about being gay, let's say. Well, that could be very, very painful. Or let's say they have a partner. Okay, well, don't bring the partner or bring the partner, but don't say that he's your partner or something. All of these things, could be really profound issues in their relationship.
Yeah. Something that's on my mind at the moment, I wonder to which degree the values of the community, that relationships are so important, is what's driving the effort on both parts to hold on to some relationship, be it just a few calls a year. Because I find that this is just unscientific, my own observation, it's very common. I find in contemporary society to say I got to disconnect with my family, from my family, or from business relationship. It's toxic, and I think sometimes it is so. But I also wonder to which degree there is a higher prevalence, like an attitude of, well, if this relationship's too hard, then goodbye, it's out the door. And maybe the effort that people like my family puts in on their part comes from a cultural prioritizing of relationships. I'm just thinking out loud.
Right. No, I hear you. I think it's a very interesting idea. I mean, I've thought, and I've written a little bit about this in my book, how in some ways, sometimes aspects of people's Hasidic upbringing, not just stay with them, but actually kind of propel their religious exit. So, for instance, I argue that in the Lubavitch community and the Hasidic community more generally, there's such a strong emphasis on being a pnimi, being someone who's truly authentic to themselves. And in the Hasidic community, of course, that's meant that relates to being authentically Hasidic and authentically in touch with God and the Torah and what have you. But it's certainly possible for some people who internalize this idea of authenticity and being committed to one's true self, that this could actually propel them out of the Hasidic community. And they say, hey, my true self is a non-Orthodox person, So I think it is interesting that maybe clearly family is very important to the Hasidic community. It's not only that members of the Hasidic community have very large families, but it's very common for those families to be very close. They spend Sabbath and holidays together, and kind of huge family meals, and people are all cooking and contributing to the meals, and and family life is so central to Hasidic identity. So yeah, I think it's a very plausible thing, that emphasis on family and love between family members can actually, paradoxically, ironically or not, contribute to ethos that promotes family cohesion and people staying in touch with each other even after a member leaves the Hasidic community. I think that's a very plausible argument.
I'm going to ask you about something else, about another big part of the story of leaving, which is when you have children and you go through a divorce. What was your finding generally happens with children? How did people perceive the process of leaving when they have children, and the custody battle that often ensues?
Right. So that's one of the ways I would argue that, unlike with the shunning that we were talking about before, where I really don't think that happens, at least not at all in the kind of formalized way that happens in the Amish community or in some other Christian or other sort of religious communities, where there's a formal declaration, okay, this person is no longer part of this community and everyone is officially prohibited from having any kind of social contact with them. I have not found evidence of that happening in the contemporary Hasidic community. But one way that the Hasidic community does try to prevent religious exit and then try to punish people who go ahead and do exit is through the child custody battles. So essentially, because the people in the Hasidic community in general, they tend to get married very young, and because they're encouraged to have children very early, it tends to happen that by the time someone's 23, 24, 25 years old and starts to really think about their religious identity and their belief systems and so on, and question their upbringing, by that time they're already married and already have several children. And usually, although there's some exceptions, usually when people are leaving the Hasidic community, married people, they tend to do it by themselves, alone. They're not, having a husband and a wife both leaving. So because of that, you have either a husband or a wife leaving the community and the other spouse staying in the community. It happens especially in the Satmar and other Hasidic communities. This is one of the ways, I should say, that the Lubavitch community is somewhat different, although there's certainly elements of this as well, but I think to a lesser degree than in the Satmar or other Hungarian Hasidic communities. But what tends to happen is that members of the community kind of line up behind the spouse who stays in the community and try to ensure that spouse gains full custody of the child or children. And this involves raising money so that spouse who remains in the community could have the best lawyers and be, very well represented legally in these court proceedings. And often, again, the spouse who leaves, they tend, because their job is sometimes tied or was tied to the Hasidic community, and because they often don't have any formal secular education, they tend to have a very hard time making ends meet just in order to survive, let alone collect huge amounts of money in order to pay for expensive lawyers. So it tends to work out that the member of the community that that stays in the community, the parent that stays in the community, he or she tends to have much better legal representation than the other spouse. And then members of the Hasidic community will often go to the court to visibly support the spouse who stays in the community. They'll testify in his or her behalf, and including sometimes saying things that are not true. For instance, claiming that the spouse who left the Hasidic community is mentally ill or suffering from some kind of mental illness or is mentally unstable or something, even if this is not true.
Yeah, you quoted a mother whose child left, who's in the community, who defended lying. She's not defending. She was sort of explaining why it happens that in a divorce battle, people in the community might lie and say, well, she's crazy, he's crazy, for even if they don't quite believe that that person's technically mentally ill, there would be accusations of mental illness, right?
Right, exactly. So I interviewed 74 people who left the Hasidic community, but I was very lucky to actually interview a husband and wife, a mother and father of a child who left the community.
Satmar.
And they're Satmar. They're very much, loyal members of the Satmar community, the parents, and they're very kind, and they sat down with me, and they said, yeah, well, what do you want us to do? You want us to go, the Hasidic community should go to the secular court and tell the secular court that we think that the person who left is making a religious mistake and that, God is unhappy with this? Well, of course, the secular court's not going to consider that. That's not a valid argument in the eyes of a secular court. But the secular court does understand mental illness. If you claim that this person is mentally ill, well, that they take very seriously. So, what are we supposed to do, basically? And she said, look, essentially the grandmother that I interviewed, she said, look, when we're talking about a child custody hearing between a parent who stays in the community and a parent who leaves the community, we're not just talking about a struggle over the present. We're talking about a struggle over eternity. We're talking about protecting the soul of the children of that marriage in order to maintain the religious purity of those children. This is a struggle for eternity. Well, what wouldn't we do in order to ensure eternity? So they were very, they felt very strongly that essentially this was legitimate means to try to win their case in a secular court by claiming mental illness on the part of the parent who left, whether or not they were actually mentally ill. And I should say, just on this business of child custody. So, like I said, this is a way that the Hasidic community both threatens people who might leave, and they say, hey, if you leave, you'll lose your children. And then this is a way that if that parent is not cowed by these threats and actually leaves, then this is a way of punishing them. And then, of course, trying to threaten other people who might leave. Hey, you see what happened to that guy or that woman? Well, you don't want that to happen to you. But one thing so this issue of child custody hearings in the ex-Orthodox context is a very common theme. People talk about it a lot, and even among people who leave the Hasidic community, they often talk about this, and they say things like, well, the judges are in the pocket of the Hasidic community. Either they're literally being paid off, or if the judges are elected, then they're following the party line of the Hasidic community in order to ensure their re-election or whatever. And again, I can't go into any of that. I don't have hard evidence one way or the other, but I do think it's worth thinking about an alternative explanation for why judges might be predisposed to look favorably on the side of the Hasidic community. And that is that even if the judge, assuming the judge is not Hasidic or Orthodox or even Jewish, him or herself, and regardless of what the judge might think about the Hasidic community, the judge sees that the Hasidic community appears to be a stable community. There's parents, there's children, there's grandchildren, they take care of each other, there's a network, there's neighbors, there's friends. This is a very stable environment. Yes, very regimented, but, very stable environment. And here you have this one person who leaves it, who seems to be totally on her own or his own. She may not have a job, or she may be struggling to get a job. She may have trouble reading English. She may be trying to get a GED, a high school equivalency certificate to go to college. She's just starting out. Her life seems in a total uproar, and you have to judge which person would be a better which environment would be better to raise the children. So again, I'm not saying that the judges are right for siding with the Hasidic community, not at all. But I'm saying it's understandable from an outsider's perspective. When you look at these two cases side by side, you see what might appeal to a secular or non-Jewish judge about siding with the Hasidic community and the Hasidic parent over the ex-Orthodox parent.
100%. It's interesting. I read some research by Nomi Stalzenberg, who is a legal scholar in maybe UCLA, I'm not quite sure, but she has written on the subject of the legal challenges that people who leave often face in terms of custody, and she wrote about the American value of change and innovation, which is supposed to be such a foundational American value, which is not represented in how judges make decisions about child custody, where it's not about reinventing yourself. What they're looking for is stability, the very opposite of that value. And I have been through this whole unfortunate rigmarole to some degree myself, and I think for me personally, eye-opening moment was speaking to a judge and hearing some of the things the judge was contemplating, and realizing that the judge is trying to make a call that is the least risk to him, not taking this enormous risk of sending off a child into a precarious situation. This is a known situation. This is stable, even if it's not perfect. And the issue is that you really can't split custody, because the environment, it's mutually exclusive, a from world with a non-from world, right? A child whose mother is secular, the child can't go to from school, the school will have issues with that. I think that's an added, by the way, issue, that very often what happens is maybe the couple has split custody, but they have agreed to send the child to a religious school, and the religious school is making demands on the parent that has left, and the demands put into jeopardy the child's enrollment in school. Let's say if mom comes with pants and without her hair covered, then we're kicking your kid out, and that is where it ends up being my way or your way, and this all or nothing battle. But I do find it really interesting that, I think this was in your book, even people in the community, even people who have gone through custody battles or are worried about it, the narrative that the judges are all in the pockets of the community seems to circulate everywhere.
Yeah, again, I think it's, unfortunately, it's a kind of easy narrative. So, again, there's so much complexity here. I don't want to, oversimplify any of this. But it's understandable that with so much complexity at play and so many different variables, it's a kind of comfortable narrative that says, hey, it has nothing to do with who we are or how we represented ourselves in court or what's happening in our life or what our financial situation is or our mental health situation or whatever it is. It's just the judges. They're corrupt, And again, I'm not saying that there are no corrupt judges. I mean, just in general, obviously, we hear all the time about judges who are corrupt and different cases who are being bought off by one interest or another, So it's not like that that this narrative is impossible to be true. But I think it hides or belies some other really important factors, like what are the internal dynamics between the husband and wife, what's the relationship between the child and the parents, what's the financial situation of both parties, the mental health situation, who does the spouse who's still Hasidic, who does they have in their corner versus who does the spouse who left have in their corner. There's so many factors that go into it, and I think to say, the judges are corrupt, I think it's not necessarily a helpful thing to do.
When I was leaving, I was very cognizant of the possibility of losing custody. And I think that's the benefit of the scare tactic. You scare people, you get people not to embark on this journey because they think their relationship with their children is at risk. And a lot of people say, I'm not even thinking about it because my relationship with my children are so important. But on the other hand, there very strong-headed people like me, knuckle-headed people who will say, well, then I'll be extra, extra, extra strategic and careful to make sure that doesn't happen to me. And I remember what really scared the bejesus out of me was that I knew a woman, I had known her personally, she had been in my class, and she had been in, her story had been written up in New York Magazine. That's how I knew about it, because it was written up in New York Magazine that she lost custody. And she had lost custody, as far as I remember, if I'm remembering it correctly, because she tested positive for drugs. And I'm wondering what you heard, the narrative about drug use and promiscuity and this whole, I've been let out of the cage and now I'm going to go and be absolutely wild, which is often also a stereotype. To which degree did you hear that to be true or not?
Right. So definitely there's a very strong stereotype within the Hasidic community that the people who are leaving the Hasidic community, either, again, they're meshuggah, they have mental illness, or they're kind of totally in the control of their base instincts. That the reason why they're leaving is for this sort of raging sexual desires and so on. And as often happens, when we talk about, sex, women are often sort of punished more severely than men. So even though they might think that the men who are leaving are also sexually promiscuous, but the charge of sexual promiscuity certainly, is more forcefully attached to the women who leave. So it's absolutely assumed that the women who leave, these are people who are, completely sexually promiscuous. They're doing very risky things. They're, again, sort of following these kind of base instincts and so on. And that's a sort of general stereotype. And then when it comes to the issue of custody, yes, the claim that they're promiscuous and that they're leading, kind of very risky, dangerous life is certainly brought up, and also the issue of drug use. So some of the people that I interviewed actually told me the same thing that you said, that women who I interviewed said, I was very careful. I never went partying. I never used drugs because I knew people were spying on me. I knew people, and this is, again, well known that in some cases, the Hasidic community will actually hire a kind of private detective to trail, let's say, the woman who leaves the community, and then see if she, has boyfriends, if she's sexually active, if she's using drugs, if she's going to nightclubs or whatever, and then use that information to hurt her in the child custody hearings. So, yes, I think there's some other Hasidic women, especially, who are very aware of this kind of tactic and have gone out of their way to avoid being, ensnared in this with this charge. And I should mention that some of those women who were very cognizant of this, they were the first ones to reject the argument that the judges are corrupt, and they would say this is ridiculous. The reason why other women got in trouble was because they were they weren't cautious enough, and that they took too many risks, that they were had boyfriends or used drugs or went clubbing or whatever, and that this came to haunt them, and that it's not, so to speak, a legal system. You just have to know what the factors are and make sure to avoid things that are potentially detrimental to your own case.
Yeah, well, you know what? You have, as you said, you have so much lined up against you. You listed all those things that are like financial support and communal support and stability structure. It's a hard ask of people who are going through such a traumatic experience to be on their 100% best behavior. There's no room for you to fall apart. So I have sympathy, but I also think. One thing that you haven't mentioned that is also stacked against the leaving parent is if the children are older, usually the preference of the children themselves will be to stay, which I think becomes the nail in the coffin. Really, that's when the hope of transitioning is very, very slim for the children.
Right. Yes, that's absolutely another factor. And again, it's not surprising for children who live their whole life in one community and, or seemingly doing well or okay at least in that community, and to then tell them, hey, let's go uproot your whole existence and live a different life with people you don't know, and I mean it must be terrifying. Again, I was an adult when I left the Hasidic community. I have 2 children now, but I only met my wife and got married and had the children after I left the Hasidic community. So, it was a very different situation for me. But I could only imagine that it's profoundly traumatic process for children who, understand a lot less about the world and the potentially problematic things about the Hasidic community itself. They may have a much more innocent view of the Hasidic community, and then they're told by their parent, oh, this community is really problematic, we should leave. And they say, why? Everything seems fine. I have a lot of friends here, I have relatives here, I love everyone here, why should we go? So yes, that's absolutely another factor that could, like you said, potentially be a very powerful influence on how child custody arrangements end up being adjudicated.
Yeah. Outside of the whole child custody thing, what fun stuff were you told about drug use and sexual exploration? Were people having a blast?
So it definitely seemed like there was a big difference between what members of the Hasidic community assumed people were doing and then what people were actually doing. And I could say for myself, I remember when I started going to college, I think at that time, I think I must have still had my long Lubavitch beard, but I remember going back to Crown Heights where I grew up, and I went to one of the local stores and met someone I knew, from years ago, and we started talking, and he said, hey, I heard you're going to college. And he's a young guy my age, and I said, yeah. And he says, wow, like you must be having so much fun, And I'm like, well, yeah, sure. I love books, and I'm taking classes and hearing lectures. He's like, no, I mean girls. I was like, oh yeah, girls. He's like, you just like all these parties, And I was like, well, should I disabuse
Should I ruin
him? Should I ruin it for him and for me and my little street cred that I have going now that I'm like this big player at college, And I was like, well, really, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never been invited to a party in my life, and I did way more drinking when I was Lubavitch and in the community than I ever did when I left it, and And at that point, I hadn't had a girlfriend yet. I hadn't, had sex yet. And like, it was like a fantasy. I mean, it was totally unrelated to my own experience. And I would assume many other people, not everyone, of course. Some people are, just more involved in partying or whatever than others. But like, that was absolutely not my experience, and definitely not the experience of everyone. Although, again, I did speak to some people, and this relates to what you were saying about, it plays a role in the child custody situation, but is also an issue more generally, given that leaving the Hasidic community can be profoundly traumatic, it's not surprising that some people might turn to drugs or alcohol or risky sexual behavior as a way of just kind of, surviving and having some joy and some uplift in their life, And I remember one of the women I interviewed, she told me that she ended up in a very kind of like very strong party environment, and she did like every drug imaginable. And I asked her what she was surprised about her experience leaving the Hasidic community, and she said what surprised her was that she survived physically. She's like, I absolutely thought I would be dead, just from all the drugs that she was taking. So that's certainly one way that some people who leave the Hasidic community may end up, at least again temporarily. She went on to have very stable, healthy life, but there was a transitionary period that was sort of chaotic, and maybe not so healthy or safe, and so that could happen for some people who are leaving the Hasidic community. And I should mention, and this is I think sort of obvious, but I think it's worth highlighting that for people who are actually concerned with ex-Orthodox Jews and their physical and mental health rather than their spiritual or religious identification, one way to decrease the prevalence of risky drug use and other kind of risky behaviors is to ensure that people are not only not disconnected from their family and friends, but that their family and friends go out of their way to stay connected to them and to make them feel loved, even if they're deciding to live a life that is different than how they were raised. I think if in an environment where that kind of love and support is present, I think it makes the likelihood of people engaging in this kind of very risky and dangerous behavior much less likely.
Recently, there's been all over the news the story about the Belzer Rebbe. Do you know where I'm going? Did you know before I said anything where I'm going with
Yes.
this? The Belzer Rebbe started an organization. Wow. We have telepathic communication. We don't even have to use this fancy software. See, that's the OTD cred code. So for my listeners, there is the Belzer Rebbe who lives in Israel, I believe, which is a different sect we haven't covered here, a different Hasidic sect. He recently formed an organization that's supposed to help people who leave, and the expressed mission of the organization is to help people without an agenda to bring them back, to just help it was prompted by the suicide of a person who had left, and it is an effort to just help people who leave be okay without any motive to change their life path. Now, I was at a shunned event, which is an event where a lot of people, misfits from the Hasidic community, meet, and we discussed that, and everyone was like very cynical about this project. Like, I think it's really hard for people to believe a Hasidic organization with a agenda to help without. Because what you said earlier about the future generations, this belief in the importance of this way makes it impossible to imagine Hasidim accepting ever a different path, and not, while professing to have no agenda, to secretly have an agenda. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, I saw that, and I was thinking about this as I said my earlier remarks, and look, I don't know the Belzer Rebbe personally, and I certainly don't feel like I'm in a position to judge exactly what his motives are. But I think that at least the idea, the stated, intentions of the program are very good.
Yes.
And I think it shows at least a possibility that at least some Hasidic communities, again, of course, there's different Hasidic communities. From the outside, they all might look alike or whatever, but there are really differences internally, and including in terms of kind of religious severity or whatever. So if the Belzer Hasidic community is doing this, it doesn't it doesn't mean that like the Satmar Hasidic community is doing it or what have you. But the point is, I think that the fact that any Hasidic Rebbe, spiritual leader, would come out and say, hey, essentially, those people who are leaving, even after they leave, they're still part of our community, and we still need to care about them. And that we shouldn't say, hey, they left, okay, we wash our hands of them, we're done. You leave, you mess up religiously, whatever, you're on your own, kid, that's it. And to view the people who leave as still part of the community and still worthy and deserving of support, of love, and assistance, I think, at least potentially, that's a very positive step. What the real motives are and how the program is going to, actually work out, I don't know. But I think that, is certainly the right thing for the Hasidic community to do, to say, hey, we, should care about these people, and if they went a step further and said, not only should we care about these people, but actually maybe part of why they're leaving us, they're leaving the Hasidic community, is because of problems inside the Hasidic community, internal to the Hasidic community, instead of just saying, again, either the people who are leaving are meshuggah, they're crazy, or they're just sex maniacs or whatever, people who are just following their base desires, or say, they're attracted to something in the secular world, but actually say, there might be something wrong with at least part of how the Hasidic community operates, and that it behooves us to focus on those things and try to, heal them and try to, deal with them. I think that would be a very positive step.
Yeah, I hear you. I think my own experience is that this is a moment. Just the very idea of stepping out and having an idea for an organization like this is mind-boggling to me. Although some people on Twitter said, "Wow, that's great. Belz is doing it. This means Satmar will do it in 20 years." But I think personally, I am feeling things shift on the ground, and I'm not quite able to articulate what's happening. Are you experiencing things changing?
Yeah, I think that there are shifts. I think even, I write about in the book, even, a couple years ago, I think that in the Lubavitch community, for instance, they started, one shul, one synagogue that was kind of devoted to sort of fringe members of the community in Crown Heights. Again, you could be cynical about these things and say, oh, it's really just an effort to try to keep people in the camp, Okay, fine. But I think that there's a growing awareness that not everyone is being served by the institutions and the patterns of behavior that have been operating in the community thus far, and that new things need to develop, new institutions, new approaches. I think that these things are happening, and I think it's interesting because when something like the show Unorthodox comes out, there's often a very hostile reaction, a very defensive reaction on the part of the Hasidic community, and they say, hey, that doesn't really represent who we are. That's a caricature of who we are, and that may be, but I would say, all popular culture, often anyway, tends to trade in caricatures and stereotypes of one, particular group or another, that these are hardly fully fleshed out people, and they tend not to have the nuance that hopefully is present in, academic scholarship about a topic, so sure, yes, it's a stereotype. It's it's imprecise, but I think that often this kind of defensive reaction takes up the space of what could otherwise be a very healthy and fruitful internal communal conversation, and say, hey, people are leaving. Why are they leaving? Could we be more honest about what's actually going on inside the community? And I think that some of those conversations are beginning to happen. But obviously, those are painful. It's always painful to look inwardly and try to see imperfections and talk honestly about how things could be improved. So it's not surprising that this is not necessarily the most popular response to this topic.
Also, Zalman, you and I are on opposite sides of kind of, you have a very pragmatic approach. Well, it's pop culture. What did you think? I have a much more idealistic view. And this, we come a little bit to a head with Naomi Seidman's podcast, where we both talk about our experiences, right? In Heretic in the House. And you say, well, of course everyone wants to hear our stories. Of course everyone wants to hear the OTD narrative. And you have a very... you're very game about it. You're very accepting of the narrative and the interest, and you think that this is just human nature, I suppose. Whereas I am on the side of these narratives have extreme importance. First of all, they have a lot wider reach than scholarship, academic scholarship. They
tell me about it.
Yeah. You wish it was different. Yeah, I think most people do not read any more sophisticated literature and get all of their impressions about often other societies from popular culture, and these narratives that that are told about the people who leave, like in unorthodox, are narratives that serve a purpose to the collective culture. They celebrate the secular culture in a way by using our stories. That's my experience, and that's really why I feel uncomfortable telling my story, because I feel like my story is then not heard as an individual's tale, but as a narrative of oppression to redemption in the secular world. So now you have a chance to defend yourself. No. I'm not. I'm just curious to hear where you're coming from.
Well, look, I think, there's no question that people's individual stories are often, tracked. They fall in to a particular mold, a sort of pre-existing mold. Like you said, there's a long history of, this narrative of from being trapped to, being redeemed. And there's religious examples of that itself, where, people came from a secular background and then they became religious, and that also kind of falls along the same pattern. First I was lost and now I'm found, and I went from darkness to light, and then there's of course secular parallels or secular instantiations of the same narrative. First I was a bigot, and then I became a liberal, then I became open-minded, and things like that. And you could see, again, it's not only with ex-Orthodox Jews, there's also ex-Muslim narratives that I think in some ways are actually very problematic, because they tend to reinforce pre-existing notions about the backwardness of Islam or something like that, which I think is a very a false and wrong-headed idea. But these narratives tend to follow this same pattern. They say, before I was Muslim, that was bad. Then I became secular. Now I'm good, And again, I think these are very problematic, very dangerous kinds of narratives. But you're right. When it comes to the ex-Orthodox narratives, there's a way in which some of these narratives, some of these memoirs or shows kind of track onto the same kind of pattern. They follow this same kind of dichotomy. Before it was bad, now it's good.
Yeah.
And if you follow that logic, what essentially you're saying is that everything that was in the Hasidic community had to be bad, because that was the dark ages, in quotes. That was the bad times, the before times, and then the flip side of that is that everything that happens in the secular world must be good, because that's in the time of light, that's the good times, and again, I think it's a very flawed dichotomy. I think it's an oversimplification of reality. Yes, there are things that are problematic in the Hasidic community, sure, and there's things that are problematic in the secular community, And for instance, every time when there's a revelation about sexual abuse in the Hasidic community, there's sometimes an article that says, whoa, look at this, these terrible communities, they're producing, sexual predators, and they're producing, this sexual abuse, and isn't the Hasidic community so terrible, And my reaction is, like, of course, those are terrible events, and that's tragic, and of course they should be prevented from happening, and when they do happen, they should be responded to in a proper, healthy, open, and sincere way, of course. But does anyone really think that sexual abuse is a unique problem for the Hasidic community? Yeah. I mean, just open the newspapers, turn on TV, go on the internet. I mean, all communities, all religious communities, all walks of life, all political orientations, have instances of sexual abuse and misconduct. So, like, and in that sense, I think it's a very kind of shallow understanding of the Hasidic community to point to these very troubling events that happen and try to paint a full picture just from those events. And so when it comes to ex-Orthodox narratives, I think that there are ways in which these narratives could be problematic and could feed into pre-existing problematic ideas about whether it's Orthodox Jews or religious people in general, as opposed to, secular, quote unquote, open-minded people, But at the same time, from my perspective, the response shouldn't be, well, let's never write these narratives. Let's never tell these stories. I look at it as a challenge, a personal challenge and a sort of collective challenge that we should write better stories.
Yeah.
We should write more sophisticated stories. Stories that are equally engaging, equally thrilling and exciting, and at the same time have a more honest and more nuanced understanding of the Hasidic community and of the outside, secular society, rather than saying, well, we'll just take our marbles and go home. That's it. Yeah. We're not going to play this game. I don't see how anyone is benefited by people not engaging in this, broader cultural discourse.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with you. I also think we need to tell better stories. That's, I think we come to the same place in the end. Sorry, I put you on the spot. You're a sport.
It's okay.
But speaking of which, you're actually writing your memoir, right? You've written your memoir, and can you catch us up? And you don't want to talk about how you ended up patching up with your mom.
My mom, I love her to death.
Yeah, I hear you.
She's my favorite mom.
She's your favorite
my
mom.
favorite mom. I'll just say about my memoir. Yes, I've written a memoir. I'm working on getting it published, and I will say that I do think that it is a challenge. I will say that I do think it's a challenge if you write a story that tries to capture as much of the nuance and subtlety of the Hasidic community, and at the same time not being, engaging in a kind of, one-dimensional understanding of the broader secular society. I think it could be a challenge to get it published, but I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to, pull that off at some point. So yes, one of the, I'll just say this about my mother. One of the what I consider the dramatic and powerful sort of messages of my memoir has to do with how I managed to maintain a loving relationship with my family, including my mother, who's very, very Orthodox, very Lubavitch, and doesn't really have. For instance, she one time told me she had gone to a wedding and met a mother of a friend of mine who had also grew up Lubavitch and then left. And this other mother told my mother, what are we going to do with our sons? Yes, of course, we're upset that they're no longer Orthodox, but we love them. And, what can we do? We have to just, embrace them, and accept them for who they are. And my mother turned to me. She told me this whole thing. And this is a bunch of years ago. And then she turned to me and said, Zalman, I just want you to know, I'm never going to tell you that. I'm never going to tell you, well, I accept you for who you are. Like, it's never going to happen, buddy. Never, So that was our starting point.
I see. And
that was our starting point. But we managed through negotiations and open conversation, painful, very, very painful conversations. I also went to therapy for years. That certainly helped. And I sort of had some of the therapists kind of coach me in how to talk to my mother and how to think about my mother, because I always loved my mother and I continue to love my mother. And at the same time, she was a profound source of pain in my life. Yeah. And what does it mean to love someone and at the same time know that they're causing you great pain, and that my life would be much simpler, at least on some level, if she wasn't a part of it. Yeah. So that was a very painful process, definitely. And at the same time, I knew that I loved her, and I couldn't imagine living a life without her. Like you were saying before about whether it comes from the Hasidic community or somewhere else, I don't know, but this idea that, families are for life, and that yes, you might even, be really, really angry at a family member, and might even feel hatred of a family member at a given time, but you can't just walk away from them. You can't just say, okay, that's it, we're done. And of course you can. I mean, empirically it happens. People do that all the time. People say, well, this family member caused me so much pain, I just couldn't live with them, And I understand that, and I want to be clear. I'm not judging anyone, and there are toxic relationships that people really do need to, just disengage from in order to survive. So I'm not making any judgment or telling anyone, what they should do in their situation. Everyone, growing up, they would say, if you had a question, a religious question, they would say, ask your local rabbi. I would say, ask your local certified mental health professional.
I see.
Don't make decisions on your own. Ask a professional. Get help if you need it, if you're struggling. That's certainly important. But for me, I got a lot of therapy, and I think through the therapy and through kind of working on myself, I was able to find a way to stay in touch with my mother and discuss our differences. Although, again, it's not like we worked everything out, but I'm who I am and she is who she is. But we managed to be in very close contact, and we love each other and we love being together with each other, even though we have profound religious and social differences.
Thank you so much for sharing this personal side of the story, because I really appreciate it. I think I relate so much. I relate to the challenge, and I relate to feeling like it's so important. And I feel like while we talk about your research, which is wonderful and doesn't really talk about you, I really was, curious about where you, fall with all of the stories that you were telling. So I appreciate you sharing both your work and your personal journey. Can you tell my viewers where they can find you, your work, your book? They can find on Amazon, sure. Right?
Yeah, the book it's on Amazon. It's on the
Degrees
my publisher,
of Separation.
Right. So the title is Degrees of Separation. It's on Amazon. It's on my publisher is Temple University Press. It's on the Temple University Press website. If you would like to avoid Amazon, that's fine. You could find me. I have a website, has a very original name. The title of the website is zalmannewfield.com. So if you go there, you'll find links to buy the book. You'll also find a link to read like the first chapter of the book for free. So if people want to just learn a little bit more, you could read a bunch of the book for free.
Everyone should buy the book. Let's tell everyone to buy the book.
Okay, whatever you want. But the point is, you can read some of the book on the website, but you could find on the website also articles that I've written. I've written a kind of review of the show on Orthodox. I've written a review of a documentary that came out earlier called One of Us, both about the ex-Orthodox community or people who leave the Orthodox community. And I also, as you mentioned earlier, I'm a host on the New Books Network podcast, and you could just go to newbooksnetwork.com. They have all the interviews. I've done like 70 interviews so far. But on my website, I also have them listed, so you could find them there. And also, you could contact me. There's a contact page on my website if you're interested in getting in touch. That would be great.
If you check your contact form, because when I messaged you, there were hiccups, but it's all straight.
The situation has been improved.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm happy to hear.
Because of you.
because of me. I'm a good messenger. Well,
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Also, send regards to your lovely daughter, who I hear might be seeing some of the things on my channel. And
yes, she's one of your big fans, and I have to tell you, she was very upset to hear that I was doing the recording without her. She said, "How could you do this without me? I want to meet Frida." She's very excited about you. I said, "Well, maybe we'll meet another time." But she's definitely your biggest fan, and she's watched a bunch of your videos already.
Awesome. What's her name? Let me give her a shout out.
Her name is Liba.
Liba. It's a beautiful name.
And she's 11.
Liba is the real Liba. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for watching.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a pleasure.
Thank you.